My name is Anthony Bresnikan. I write about movies for Entertainment Weekly, and often, when we movie lovers talk about films, we use the same language over and over again. We'll say it's badass or it's kick-ass. It gets to be a little devalued, like, Smurfs was badass, So you've got to kind of strain toward a whole other level of grandiloquent profanity to speak about a movie like this one, Quentin Tarantino's Django Unchained, right? I can't do that. I'm not qualified. You need a master technician for those words, somebody like a Samuel L. Jackson, and there may be kids out there. So suffice to say, Django Unchained is just a dark, savage, bloody, nightmarish tale of revenge, and I think I can tell just by looking at you in the front row that that's just perfect for this crowd, right? I read the script and I think, I don't know, maybe Quentin would disagree with me, but I see it as kind of a twisted, bloody fairy tale, right? It's this story of slavery in the Deep South before the Civil War, but it's also got this great big beating heart. And that heart's beating really fast because the people are terrified. So all right, we're gonna bring out the cast, we're gonna bring out the filmmaker, we're gonna show you some footage. It's never been seen before, and I know you want to see that. So let's start. We're going to start with the cast, and we like to go in alphabetical order. So you know him from Dreamgirls, from Collateral. Played a very colorfully named murder consultant in Horrible Bosses. He won an Oscar for bringing Ray Charles back to us just a few months after he left. Mr. Jamie Foxx. This next gentleman, you definitely know his face. You should probably know his name because he's a terrifying individual on The Shield, Justified. He's going to be in Steven Spielberg's Lincoln coming up. Walton Goggins. You got another man here. You know him. Miami Vice, Nash Bridges. He's on Eastbound and Down. Don Johnson. Another young man. We can thank Quentin for making the introduction a few years ago. Since then, he's been in Water for Elephants, Carnage, Three Musketeers. We know him as the guy who scared the hell out of us as Colonel Hans Landa. Gentleman villain in Inglourious Bastards, Mr. Christoph Waltz. So finally, you know her from Scandal. She was in Ray with Jamie. She played Forrest Whitaker's wife in The Last King of Scotland, and she is that pure core, that beating heart that I was talking about in Django Unchained. Kerry Washington. There are two other fellows in this movie. They're not here with us today. Samuel L. Jackson and Leonardo DiCaprio. We'll talk about them behind their backs. All right? So finally, I guess the grand master of this circus. Reservoir Dogs, Pulp Fiction, Kill Bill movies, Glorious Bastards. He's a little bit shy. So please give him a big welcome, Quentin Tarantino.
Stand up. Oh, no, you're down there. You're down there, my bad.
Listen to you.
Yeah, I wanted that to be.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for waiting in line and coming and see this.
So Quentin, I think you guys tell us, you've seen the trailer, right? You know a little bit about this movie, right? So we're gonna show the clip in a minute, but first we're just gonna talk a little bit. Tell us about how long is this idea about a slave goes on the hunt, gets free, goes on the hunt for the woman he loves. How long has this idea been kicking around in your head?
I don't know, about, I think about 13 years. It's been kind of all together and everything. And I've always wanted to do a Western. And since spaghetti Westerns are, I mean, I like all types of Westerns actually, but since spaghetti Westerns have kind of always been my favorite, I always thought that the day I do one, it would be in that kind of Sergio Corbucci universe kind of thing of spaghetti surrealism. And the violence and the surrealism and all that and the cool music and all that stuff.
So stylized, right?
Very much. But the thing is, so when I figured out what kind of a story, the germ, a lot of things came to it later, but the initial germ of the whole idea was a slave who becomes a bounty hunter and then goes after overseers who are hiding out on plantations. Now, from that point on, other things came into it. It became a love story, him trying to find his wife. But that first initial thing 13 years ago was a slave who becomes a bounty hunter and hunts white men. Before the Civil War.
That's not controversial or anything, right? So what I like about you as a filmmaker is that you're the director, writer who says, fuck it, I'm killing Hitler.
Yeah, right.
I'm gonna kill him. So with this movie, are you striving for any kind of historical accuracy, or are you painting more of a nightmare portrait of the antebellum South?
Well, you know, frankly, to tell you the truth, it can't be much more nightmarish than it was in real life. It can't be more surrealistic than it was in real life. It can't be more outrageous than it was in real life. It was fucked up, and it was bad, and it's, frankly, it is surrealistic. It's unimaginable to think of the pain and the suffering that went on in this country. So hence, making it perfect for a spaghetti Western interpretation of this entire story, because actually the reality and the historical aspect of it fits completely into the biggest canvas that you could think of for this type of story.
Yeah. Now, Jamie, I interviewed you when EW did the first look on this movie, and I asked probably what was a stupid question. I was like, do you think this movie will be controversial? What did you say?
You know what, I think it is, but I think we've grown up too, though. I think we're big boys and big girls now, and I think that when you talk about the courageousness of Quentin Tarantino, it's a totally different ball game. You know, you expect Quentin to blow the walls off of it. You expect him to actually go the extra mile. So just the script alone was blazing through Hollywood before anybody even, started the process. And there's a man that I won't mention, but he goes by the name of Mr. No. And he says no to every script. And I saw him in a party here. Jamie, I wanted that script so bad. I wanted that Quentin Tarantino script. I wanted that script, I tell you. And so before we even got to this process, the script alone was courageous. It was, controversial, but you expect that from Quentin Tarantino. And then actually when we started shooting it, all of that it didn't fall away, but you sort of watched Quentin putting together this, fantastic film with all these fantastic people, and it was just like waking up in the morning going to an all-star game, with all these great actors and actresses.
How did you get into the headspace of Django? Because as the story starts out, he's not a hero at the beginning, man. He's beaten down, literally beaten down and marched to almost nothing. So how did you get into that headspace, and where'd you take him from there?
Well, that's interesting, because getting there was really a journey. Because QT at the beginning of this process, when we started rehearsals, I don't know if you remember this, but he pulls me to the side and he says, "I'm worried that you can't get to that slave." And I was like, "What do you mean?" Because and what he was saying was that, you live your life as Jamie Foxx, or you live your life as this, celebrity. How do you now strip everything away and get to the slave? And so that was the most important thing, was letting everything go and allowing because we all have egos, we all have our thing that we do. But he said, throw that out of the door right now so we can actually get to the work. So that's what was needed for me, to go do homework, to listen to what he says, come back, strip yourself all the way down, and start all over again.
You know, it was actually interesting. I remember, and it was our first day of rehearsal. We went out and had a talk, and I was just talking about, you know, the movie before the movie. The whole movie that has to be lived
Backstory.
before the story actually starts. And when you are introduced to Django, you see him on a chain gang being led from Mississippi to Texas with a bunch of other slaves, and so there's about 7 of them. And I took a piece of paper and I made like 7 X's and connected them like they were a chain. And I circled the sixth one. And I said, Jamie, where I'm coming from at the beginning of this movie, Django is just 6 from the 7th on the left in this slave train. All right, the whole movie is about him becoming a hero and becoming a cowboy and becoming this. But the way it's got to start is he's got to be anonymous from the rest of these guys. 6 from the 7th on the left in the chain gang. And then Jamie goes, Quentin, that's exactly how I see this guy.
Right.
Well, Jamie, you know, obviously you didn't, thank God, have to go through what he goes through, but there must have been a time in your life before you were a famous guy who had an Oscar, before you were Jamie Foxx, literally before you were Jamie Foxx, right? Yeah. Did you have to go back? Did you have to? Was there anything in your life, a hard time that you went back to and sort of drew from?
In actuality, when I met Quentin, before we talked about the script, I just talked about growing up in Texas. You know, being a kid, you know, there was a little. It was racially charged, just to be honest with you, and some of the experiences that I went through as a kid, I expressed to him. And without, you know, rehashing all of that right now, but saying, you know, being called nigga as a young kid growing up by grown people, you know, it was something that I had to deal with, you know, coming from the South. But by having that done to me, I was able to grasp what was being said in the script. I'm not saying it's better than anybody else, but I knew because it had been done to me. And whenever you start to do a project, and I'm sure all of these actors and actresses up here could tell you that when the project becomes special, when it becomes magical, that means at certain points in your life, it paralleled your story. So I had certain parallels growing up as a young kid in the South that also paralleled Django's character, and I used it to my advantage.
So we're going to get to the clip in a minute, but before we do that, I want to talk to Christoph. He's the other part of this buddy story. You played Dr. King Schultz. He's the man, he's a bounty hunter. He's the one who rescues Django and takes him on this journey, becomes almost like a father figure to him. He's his Obi-Wan Kenobi in some ways.
More like his Yoda.
More like his Yoda, you're right.
No.
But how does he's this man, he's from Dusseldorf. He's not somebody from the South. He's not an American. I think there's a great joke that he's just not used to being around Americans because they're all so savage. It's in the script. How does he fit into this world? Or is the point that he does not?
Look, you said rescue. That's not a rescue. Dr. King Schultz needs Django. He needs him, first of all, he needs him to get the story going. But second, he needs him because I'm not going to tell you the story. You go and see the movie. This is a different relationship than someone picking up a slave and kind of rescuing him. No. This is a unique and fabulous relationship that is forged in the course of fantastic adventures. We're talking about a spaghetti western. And I find it sensational that Italian directors import a genre to Italy to forge a new thing, spaghetti western, and then an American director comes and takes the new thing and brings it back to America. So talking about the surrealism, well, it's not surreal. It's all happening. You know where? There. Dr. King Schultz, the character that I'm playing, and Django, or Django and Dr. King Schultz, rather, to keep the order in its appropriate order. is for the time being, until that kind of episode in Django's life ends, rather sort of bloody and elaborately, but they are a team. And yes, the dynamic changes over the course, but whether that's a father figure or a teacher, I don't know.
But where does he fit in with these? I mean, he has the ability to see something in Django that other white men in this story, they can't see beyond his skin color. So why does Dr. King Schultz, why is he able to forge this bond with?
I don't care about other white men.
Yeah, but one of the things though is Schultz's character is a stand-in for basically one of the things I wanted. People would say, "Well, why did you want to do a movie about a slave?" I go, "Well, I actually really didn't do a movie about a slave. I might do a movie about a slave someday." The character starts off as a slave, and I was interested in a slave narrative. I was interested in a story that took place during the antebellum South, and that brutal time, and actually having a black character having to negotiate through that time. But to me, one of the fun things and exciting things about telling this story was to take the Western genre that we know so well and have seen so often, and so much so that, I mean, I love Westerns, but I feel like I've seen every story in a Western ad nauseum a zillion times. So to take that type of Western story and place it in the antebellum South and put a black character at the center of it, all right, and doing the Western cliches, but doing them in the South in a way you don't see, the way the Westerns bend over backwards to not deal with slavery. I wanted to deal with it. And in the place where Schultz stands, Dr. Schultz, is, he is that experienced gunfighter that teaches the know-nothing kid how to handle a gun, how to be a killer, how to take care of himself. But and that's just a classic trope from Westerns in general, whether it be Steve McQueen as the young guy and Brian Keith as the old gunfighter in Nevada Smith, or if it's Giuliano Gemma is the young gunfighter and Lee Van Cleef is the teacher in Day of Anger, all the way to, like I said, Empire Strikes Back, Luke Skywalker and Yoda.
But not to belabor the question, but what is it about Schultz that makes him more enlightened than the other men in this story? Is it because he's a stranger in a strange land himself?
Well, there is that. There absolutely is that. He's actually, as savvy as he is about the West and the bounty hunting game and profession, is as unsavvy as he is about the realities and the cruelties that exist in the South. As far as face-to-face dealing with it. And it's one of the things that actually becomes kind of interesting in the story is in the first half of the story, it is Schultz operating as the mentor, teaching Jamie how to read, how to do this, and how to draw fast, all the things that you've seen before in Westerns, and it's cool to see a black character doing it. But when they actually get into the thick of it, when they actually get to Mississippi, and now they're surrounded by the bondage, and they're surrounded by the cruelty, and they're surrounded by the hatefulness, it's Schultz who is caught short. But Jamie's not. Django's not. Django knows this world. He knows it very well. And and he becomes the one that helps Schultz negotiate it from that point on. It's a very interesting way of passing the potato.
Which, by the way, corresponds completely to what Jamie just said about his experience and my experience. I had no experience with this issue whatsoever because I grew up in Vienna, Austria. Thank you. What are you doing afterwards?
But there were actually, Christoph will hit me in the head with something if I reveal the complete backstory, but there is an interesting backstory to Christoph's character that has nothing to do with, it's not told in the movie, it's not set up, but it actually makes sense why he would be enlightened in this way. He's without going into detail, there's his own reason of being sort of a fugitive from Germany that brings him to America.
And one last thing before we play the clip, everybody knows he's a dentist. That's what where the doctor comes from. How did you make him a dentist? Is it because Doc Holliday, that was his trade?
Well, it wasn't lost on me that Doc Holliday was a dentist, and I always thought that there was, without him turning him into a drunk or a TB case, I always thought there was something kind of interesting about that. But I did want to make him a doctor. And I didn't want to make him a doctor of philosophy, and I didn't want to make him a sawbones. But the idea of actually tooth extraction, and even the idea...
Something precise about that.
Yeah, exactly. And also the idea that he can hide in plain sight. All right, if he's the bounty hunter and he's looking for, if he's going to a town and he knows that a guy's living there, he's going to track him down, he has his little dentist wagon. And so he actually has a reason to be showing up into places. I would like the hiding in plain sight aspect.
So that wobbly tooth is meant to disarm people because it's so threatening.
That's exactly it.
They're not here, so now we'll talk about them when I want to talk to Walton, too. Walton, you play Calvin Candy, that's Leonardo's character. You play one of his henchmen, is that correct? Can you tell us about who he is?
His Mandingo fight trainer extraordinaire. He's a look. I know the company that I'm sitting in. I'm afraid to close my eyes for fear that this isn't really happening. This is the coolest and has been the coolest experience in a number of cool experiences that I've had as an artist. It's unbelievable, really. But this guy,
what's his name?
Billy Crash.
Yeah, he's not
Billy Crash.
It's not like where the actor can kind of sit up here and make an argument for him having any kind of redeeming values. He's a ruthless dude. But he's also the way that Quentin has kind of constructed this whole thing. He kind of gives it to you from every different perspective.
Yeah.
And this guy in particular is from a working man's perspective. He works for the man too.
Yeah.
He's not the man, but he works for the man. And he's a tough cookie. He's a quick draw.
So Candy's he's the sadistic plantation owner who likes to watch the Mandingos fight. It's a gladiatorial combat. He likes to watch slaves fight to the death. But you're the guy who gets his.
I get his entertainment on.
He's the Mandingo trainer. He trains the guys to fight to the death.
Candy keeps his hands nice and clean. You're the guy who gets in there with him, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So and then Stephen is his house slave. That's Samuel L. Jackson. Now, how does he fit into this relationship, the three of them?
Well, actually, it's actually kind of funny, actually, by making it about the three of them. It's almost like, one of the things that was actually very interesting about the antebellum South is the fact that when you had slavery, you could literally have literally the equivalent of big corporations today. You would have big corporations then, but they would just be families, whether it be cotton or sugar beets or sugarcane or anything. A whole family could in a few states, families could corner the entire market, and because they had slave labor, very easy to do. So in that situation of Candyland being the fourth largest cotton plantation in the South, Leo's character is obviously the owner of the place. He inherited the place. He's like a king. And it's like Stephen, the house servant, and Billy Crash are like the two CEOs of the company. Stephen runs everything that has to do with the house, everything that has to do with the farm, everything that has to do with cotton, everything has to do with the Candyland running on its own and doing its own thing. He handles the Mandingos. And so strangely enough, even though they don't have that many scenes together, the Billy Crash and Stephen relationship is actually quite a close one because they are working together to keep Candyland going.
Stephen, he's a slave, but he's not sympathetic.
No, not at all. Well, but again, everyone has their reasons, all right? And Stephen's reason is Stephen is basically Calvin Candy's father. He raised Candy. He took care of his daddy. He took care of his daddy's daddy, and raised Calvin Candy from he was a little boy. Stephen's pretty much the only person that Calvin listens to, and he's got his nice little five's thumb there. And he's the rooster around there. All the slaves are scared of him, but his situation is good. His situation is great. At the
expense of everyone else.
At the expense of everybody else. One of the things that became really interesting when I started writing about these characters, especially about the slave owners and the plantation owners in particular, is it was interesting thinking about it in terms of Westerns, but what I actually found the most applicable was if you thought about it in action film terms, if you thought about it in terms of a swashbuckler, where you have the cavalier swordsman out there, but he's fighting the king. He's fighting Cromwell, or he's fighting the king. And that's what these plantation owners were like. They were like, on their property, they were kings, but their property could be 65 miles long, could be 100 miles long. And inside of that property, there's all the slaves, there's all the overseers and their families. They're there who are working for peanuts. All right, just keeping the structure together. But inside of all those people living and existing on that ground and on that land, they are subjects. They were the subjects of the plantation owner, which is very similar to being like a king. Stephen's role, I even wrote it in the script. He's like the characters that Basil Rathbone would play in Old Swashbucklers. He's the scheming man, all right, whispering in the king's ear and working the power plays and the intrigues of the court to his advantage.
Now, Don, you play plantation owner too, Spencer.
I would prefer if you call me Big Daddy.
Big Daddy. I'll say this, Big Daddy. I doubt I'm the first person to say this.
Some of us have earned the right, and
I don't know.
My character is the kinder, gentler, more lovable plantation owner.
But still a
All
bad
my
guy.
slaves love me.
That's what they all say.
That is true.
I doubt I'm the first person to say this, but you can really rock a white suit, Don.
Say that again.
I said I doubt I'm the first one to say this, but you really rock a white suit.
I've been told that before.
So,
And you do realize we have Crockett and Tubbs in the same
yeah, that's
movie.
true. I didn't make that connection.
Yeah, baby. On and off the screen.
So, Big Daddy, how did you get into this character? How did you get into his skin?
It's funny. I was reading a lot at the time that Quentin and I were talking. I was reading a lot about the mid-century there, and more about the Old West and Comanches and how they interrelated with the slaves. And a lot of slaves escaped to the West to join the indigent Native Americans. And I just happened to be reading about a lot of this historical stuff, and Quentin and I had been talking about working together for many years, and of course this is a great joy for me and a privilege to work with all of these actors. And when Quentin mentioned Big Daddy, I thought it was a character that I could step into and make him Big Daddy. Make him big and flamboyant, and this character is he's not to diminish the seriousness of the time and the period and what Quentin was talking about slavery and the surreal and brutal and the inhuman element of enslaving any human being on any level. But Big Daddy is a character. If you can find something to love, he's
Kind of the banality of evil.
he's found a way to do that. He's funny and bad.
How did you get the voice?
I studied a lot of Foghorn Leghorn.
Yeah. That's the best answer I could have imagined.
That's a joke, son.
I say I studied a lot of Foghorn Leghorn, boy. Don't you understand?
You've been studying it for years for just such an occasion. So Carrie, we're coming to you now, just like in the movie, you are the destination. You play a character whose name is Broomhilda von Schaft. That's an unusual slave name.
Really?
How did she get that name? Who is she?
Well, Broomhilda got her name the way most people of African descent in this country got their names, by the person who owned her. And she was owned by a German family before she was sold to the plantation where she meets Jamie's character, Django.
And so she's it's almost like she's been raised by this German family. You have to speak German in the movie. It's how you
I do. I
communicate
had to
with Dr.
speak
Schultz.
German, and I had the luxury of having the coolest German coaches on the planet, including this guy. I mean German language, not of country of origin.
He's an Austrian.
But that was a real pleasure for me to learn German, to both speak and sing in the film.
Did any of it stick?
I'm sorry?
Did any of it stick? Can you still speak it? Not that you
Yeah,
have
yeah.
to, but just wondering.
Of course.
How did you do, Christoph? You're somebody who, I guess the shame is that you only get to speak 2 languages in this movie, but
I agree.
how did you work with Carrie? She said you were one of her coaches.
One day in rehearsal, Carrie came and said she's nervous about the German, and then she worked with someone who taught her the beginnings of a rather difficult language by singing children's songs, and she sang one of the most beautiful lullabies that exist in the German culture. From early 19th century, so it was even period. And she sang it that I almost started crying, and I hate to admit that I start crying. It was so beautiful, and it was perfect. So there was nothing to coach other than to marvel at this talent and the beauty.
But also in the original script, a lot has changed from the original script, but one of the things that happened in the original script was that my character was supposed to whistle. And I confided in Quentin that I actually don't know how to whistle. Of course, after I got the part, I confided in Quentin that I didn't know how to whistle.
I can help you with that.
And so we instead used this song instead of the whistling.
Yeah, we instead of the whistling section in the script, she sings this German lullaby, and it's just beautiful. And
No,
no, I gotta save it for the movie. Save it. It's the wrong context. It's the wrong context. But one of the things though, it was we had a few different German crew members because we carried some people over from *Inglourious Basterds* when we shot in Germany, so I check in on them and say, "So how's Carrie doing with her German lessons?" And they go, "Quentin, it's hard for us to even judge it." And I go, "Why?" "Because she has the cutest German accent ever." It's just so adorable.
I was actually, I want to say, I was actually very grateful that my character had to do 2 things that I'd never done before, horseback riding and speaking German, mostly because this film scared the shit out of me. And when we first start, and I tend to gravitate towards things that scare me because I feel like it will help me grow creatively, but when the ball started rolling, I was a little bit paralyzed on how to really step into the brutal world of that Broomhilde had to exist in and survive in, and really devoting myself to studying the German every single day. I had about 4 different teachers, and studying the horseback riding every day. I mean, those things kept me connected to the world at times when I just wanted to stay under the covers and hide,
And I said earlier that I was thinking of Django as a kind of brutal, bloody fairy tale, and that's because Broomhilde is a character from mythology. She's the princess in a castle that has to be rescued by Siegfried, the hero.
Yeah,
is that
part
of the intention?
Yeah, it all kind of came about in its own way. As I didn't start it that way writing the script, but it just kind of developed as my scripts tend to do. I have an idea where I'm starting, but I never quite know 100% where I'm going, and I don't want to. I want it to build as I write, and just throw your will out there, and it comes back. But one of the things that started happening as I was doing it is I realized that Django's journey matches the German fairy tale of Siegfried saving Broomhilde, Siegfried slaying the dragon, Siegfried going into the ring of hellfire in order to extract her. And then with Schultz there as the perfect person to recognize, to teach Jamie about the legend, and there would be a legend that would mean something to Broomhilde with her German upbringing. It just kind of came about, and I go, oh wow, that's really interesting, because to me, one of the things that's really important in the movie is the fact that, look, back then, slaves, unless the master was ridiculously benevolent, slaves weren't allowed to get married. They didn't want that kind of thing going on. And they didn't want that kind of solidarity happening amongst the people. So the fact that, one, they had their own secret marriage. They had their own marriage going on. But the fact that she would be sold away, and he would be sold in this direction, and she would be sold in that direction.
Very common.
Yeah, and that's like, well, that's it. I mean, that's just it. There's just no finding her again. They might as well send her on the moon. And for him to actually get his freedom, get a situation that he can make himself better, but then he's still going to go back into that pit of hell that could kill him to extract her back. To me, that was a story that I have never seen dramatized before, and I wanted to be the one to dramatize it.
Now, there's another. You have one more week to shoot, correct?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
We're not done yet. We got one more week. This is my second to last. I got 2 days off, and then after that, boom. Today's being one of the days. Back to work.
So, and you recently added Jonah Hill to the cast. Can you tell us anything about who he plays?
Yeah, Jonah Hill. Yeah, we just got through shooting his stuff last week. He's in a sequence with Dawn. It's part of a. They're not the Ku Klux Klan, because the Ku Klux Klan came about after
the Civil War.
After the Civil War to keep black folks in line after they got their freedom. But the predecessors to the Ku Klux Klan was a group of people called the Regulators, and they were people, and they were there to to keep slaves in line, keep slaves, go find them if they escaped, and keep them from escaping. And just, terrorize them, basically. And so it's a regulator raid that's being led against Django and Schultz. And I'll let everyone be the judge, but it starts off really like it's going to be very scary and very intense. And then they have this sequence that's one of the funniest things I think I've ever written. It's right up there with the handing out the color names in Reservoir Dogs.
Where they're there to do brutal business, but there's something like
we can't go into it. We can't go into it. But it's just one of those weird things where one of those realities that's been staring us in the face when it comes to Ku Klux Klanism that no one's ever addressed. Yeah. And I thought about it. I wrote a piece against Birth of a Nation, and I brought up one little point that had never been brought up before, which is I can't talk about.
Okay.
All right. But then when it came time to do the scene, that point became one of the things in the scene, and I wrote it, and I read it to a friend of mine, and as soon as I got to that point, they just started bursting out laughing. And I realized, hey, I think I got something here. And it was it's right up there with the handing out the color names in Reservoir Dogs. I think it's pretty funny. We just did it last week.
So we're going to open it up to the audience for some questions, but I have one more. And if you don't mind, your T-shirt here. Can you tell us what this is?
Oh, this is
These are the characters.
Yeah, an artist sent me a T-shirt of all my characters fighting in a sandbox. As little kids, sort of like, remember that comic book, The Little Archies?
Yeah.
All right, well, they're sort of like the little Archies of all my characters.
Now, fans of your movies have poured over it, and they pull out little details, and they try to find a unified theory of the Tarantino verse, where is Mr. White, Vincent Vega's brother from Pulp Fiction, is Donnie Donowitz the father of Lee Donowitz from
Well, it's not Mr. White. It's Vic Vega. It's Mr. Blonde.
Mr. Blonde. I'm sorry, I misspoke. I misspoke. Yeah. But no, Mr. Blonde. Are there any characters in Django who are the forebears of other characters in the Quentin Tarantino?
Well, there is one, but I don't want to say it. I want you to just watch it and figure it out and everything. However, there is one thing I will say though. All right, Broomhilda von Shaft, her and Django will eventually have a baby. And then that baby will have a baby, and then that baby will have a baby, and that baby will have a baby, and one of these days, John Shaft will be born. John Shaft started with this lady here, and this man here. They're the great-great-great-great-grandparents of Shut Your Mouth.
Who is the man?
John Shaft?
Who is the man who risked his neck for brother man? Shaft. Right on.
I saw the leather etching on that saddle with the D, and I thought maybe one of his children's will have a wallet with something etched on it.
Very possibly.
Possibly? All right, that's good enough. All right, let's open it up for the audience, unless you had something to add there, Jim. Nope.
Hey, I
All
like
right.
your tailor, young lady.
Quentin Tarantino, this is crazy. I'm your biggest fan. A bunch of us camped out here last night to see you today.
Thank you very much.
Happy.
You look damn hot in that bride outfit, I gotta say.
That's going on the blog later.
You look like Charlize Theron is playing the bride. You look awesome, honey.
Oh, thank you so much. Okay. So. So, you consistently write films with strong, assertive, intelligent women when other writers, both male and female, struggle to avoid female stereotypes. So, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more of some of the female characters of this film, and if you could give advice to other writers trying to write full, interesting female characters.
Oh, well, thank you very much for that. I appreciate it, darling. Well, you know, one of the things that's actually kind of, you know, one of the things in my work is I don't really do family dramas or anything like that. I usually do genre cinema.
That would be some family.
Yeah, exactly. You know, be it action films or kung fu films or whatever. And in the history of genre cinema, there's been quite a few proactive, female Avengers or warriors or heroes and heroines in this cinema. Not always in American cinema, but definitely in Hong Kong cinema and Japanese cinema and cinema throughout genre cinema throughout the world. And I just dig strong chicks. I don't know how to write it any other way than that. And now it's funny because one of the things in this movie, you know, some people have brought up about, you know, I would think that from the man who wrote Kill Bill, that I'd like to see the black heroine in this be kicking ass and doing this and doing that. And I go, well, that's not this story, though. That's not this story. This story, to me, there is an aspect of Broomhilda is a princess in exile. She, you know, if this is that kind of tale like I've been telling, Leonardo's Calvin Candy character, he's the evil king who has taken over and has ruined the countryside, ruined the kingdom, and is driving into the ground and murdering people. And she's the princess in exile who's trapped in the tower and can't get out, has tried. When we eventually finally catch up with her character after seeing her through memory pieces and fantasies from moments from Django's imagination, when we finally catch up with her, she's just tried to escape. She's being punished for escaping, so she's done everything she can on her own to get away, and she can't. And she needs the love of her life to come down there and burn this motherfucker down to get her out.
I think you know, one of the things that Quentin does so beautifully, to speak to your question about advice and how, is that Quentin really, he doesn't just write strength for the sake of strength, he writes true characters. So, and he really thinks about the cultural and the psychological context of the character. So this is a woman who exists in a time when black women had to be independently strong because the destruction of the black community began with the breakdown of the black family. So black men and women were separated, not allowed to love each other, not allowed to be married, not allowed to have their own children. So the strength is actually the strength to believe in love and in one's own humanity in a time when in our Constitution, they're only 3/5 of a human being. So there's a unique strength that fits this time period. So it's not just kick ass for the sake of kick ass. It's like, what makes this person strong. It's her belief in love, her belief that in a time when two people aren't allowed to love each other, she truly in her heart believes that maybe there's an idea that he could come back and that she's lovable and deserving of that love. And the idea that she could be a princess rescued in a castle in a time when black women were never afforded even the luxury of having that fantasy.
Excellent. Next question, please.
This question's actually for the entire panel. First off, thank you so much for being here. You guys are totally setting that bar real fucking high today. So, sorry about the language. This question especially, it starts with Quentin. You have a knowledge of cinema that is beyond anything I could imagine. What did you give them to reference? And for the panel, what did you guys think of the stuff that he gave you?
Oh, that's interesting. It was actually funny. I think actually of the group here, it was really only Carrie. All right, because Carrie was the super inquisitive one about stuff. All right.
Imagine that.
Carrie just looked at it like, oh wow, I get to hang out with a film professor. Teach me, feed me. And. So I actually pointed Carrie in the direction of a few different movies. Actually, in particular, some stuff from the 30s and the 40s that actually dealt with the antebellum South, and not in the worst way possible. That actually were quite interesting. One of the movies I gave her to watch in particular is a film called The Flame of New Orleans, directed by Renee Clair, and it starred Marlene Dietrich. And the thing about it, René Clair being this great French director who normally makes movies in France, and it's all about the picadillos and the intrigues of the house. In his French movies, you would follow the servants as well as you would follow the masters of the house in their sexual goings-on and their flirtations and their picadillos. Well, when he dealt with a movie that took place in antebellum New Orleans, he did the same thing with the slave characters. You're actually following them, and this slave has got a crush on this guy, on this girl, and when the two white masters meet together, the slaves go off walking together too, and it's a refreshing portrayal. From a master filmmaker, and so that was one of the ones that I gave her to watch. And I also gave you the spoilers to watch, because actually there was this also because Marlene Dietrich, Marlene Dietrich's maid in that movie is called Brumhilde. I go, do you want to watch this with you? She goes, I'll watch it. Anything, I'm happy to.
Yeah. But honestly, you think you know the extent of his knowledge about cinema and music and television. It's ridiculous. I mean, when you were on set with this man, half the time you're like, I don't know what he's talking about. It's amazing. We had a cast dinner where he referenced something that Don did that Don was like, I forgot about that. I mean, it was like...
No, that's a true story.
Yeah.
He said, yeah, you did this film that... I said, no, I didn't do that.
Yeah.
He said, no, you did it. This was the art director. This was the third grip. This was the best boy. And I went,
What was it,
oh,
Quentin?
shit, yeah, I did do that movie.
I talked about so much stuff. I never remember exactly which one we were talking about. But actually, on the set, I have a 35 print of this really fun movie that Don did back in 1975 called Return to Macon County, with him and Nick Nolte together. And I have a print of it. So we actually screened that for the cast, and that was a really good screening that day.
That was big fun. Yeah. In answer to that question, just to top it off, I had some downtime on the movie, and Quentin sent me a care package of films that I should brush up on, and I was a big fan of spaghetti westerns anyway, but Sergio Leone and all the stuff that had been circulated around to those of us who didn't get so deep into the art houses as maybe some others, So he enlightened me to Sergio Corbucci and a film called Minnesota Clay, and I as I was laid up recovering and everything, I got deep into these films. I went, oh shit, now I know what he's talking about.
And Corbucci directed 66's Django.
Yeah,
and you
yeah.
have Franco Nero, the actor,
Oh, yeah.
in that movie, in this.
Ab-
how'd you get him
absolutely.
into it? And did you say you want to be in another Django movie?
Oh well, I've met Franco Nero is one of my favorite Western icons that there is, and Sergio Corbucci is definitely the kind of the spiritual godfather of this film. I don't think the film even would have been this way if I hadn't been so. I was actually writing a book about Sergio Corbucci when I came up with actually the way to finally tell this story. One of the things that's fun about when you write subtextual film criticism is your whole thing is you're making a case for what this director's world point of view or what he's trying to do with the story. That's the whole thing. Now, in subtextual film criticism, you don't have to be right. It doesn't have to be what the director necessarily was
what
thinking.
you
It's
gathered
just what you're gathering from it, and you're making the case. It doesn't matter what they were thinking on the day. So I was writing this thing and really dealing with how his movies had this evil Wild West, horrible Wild West, and it's surreal, and it really dealt a lot with fascism, left over from World War II, dealing with it in his Western characters. So I'm writing this whole piece on this. And then I was thinking, at some point, I go, well, I don't really know if this is what Sergio was thinking while he was doing this, but I know I'm thinking it now, and I can do it. And so that's when I kind of got the idea to actually finally tell this story. Once I had the landscape and the universe that it needed to take place in. And when I think, well, what could be that horrible a West? What could be a story that has those kind of consequences? I go, the antebellum South.
Now, we are out of time. I wish we could go
Let's
on
just do
much
one more
longer.
question.
All right, one more question. But it has to be good. Is it good? You got a good one?
Hell yeah.
All right, you better make it count.
I just want to say, Quentin, you are a glorious bastard.
Oh, thank you much, mate.
And I love your films. I was just wondering if Sacha Baron Cohen made it into the film. And can you tell us, Kill Bill 3, will there be one?
Yeah. I'm not sure if there's going to be a Kill Bill 3. I was always going to wait 10 years from the first one, so we'll see what happens. It's kind of a thing in progress. No, Sasha wasn't able to do it, but he's a great guy, and we'll probably do something else together.
Was he
somewhere
doing the
along
Jonah role?
Yeah, no. He was going to be in another character. He was going to be another character, but the thing is, that piece we ended up not doing it. We ended up taking it out of the movie.
Now, in keeping with that, we'll close with one question. After you're going to finish shooting in a week, you got to edit, and you're going to go talk about this movie all over the world. What do you know? What's next? What 13-year-old idea is rattling around your head and will be made to the screen next?
This one has been such a lifetime adventure as far as doing it is concerned. I think this and Kill Bill are like my two biggest adventures as far as, there's a big adventure making the movie. There's the adventure of the movie, the epicness of the movie, and then there's the life-changing adventure of doing it. And I'm not even finished with that yet, actually, to tell you the truth. So by the time I get through editing and doing all the post and the going all around the world, I don't even know who I'll be then, Anthony.
All right.
So we'll find out.
So, all right. Well, thank you very much, guys, for being here. Let's give a round of applause for Quentin and the gang. Thank you very much, Hall H.
Thank you, everybody, for your support. We'll see you at Christmas.